with this very international group today, it would be easy or convenient to say that I am our common connection, but it's actually the quality of our hearts that's the common connection. So right there, I hope that this gives each of us a sense of comfort. We may not have met each other physically, but our hearts already know each other. And here we are, connected from throughout the world. To me, this says a great deal about your evolution, and I hope that that gives each of us a sense of comfort in our group today. I'm not the common denominator. It's our hearts that are the common denominator. And we're interested in healing and well-being and really embracing this journey of life, embracing this journey of evolution. The basis of my approach is that we are in a process of evolution, and that it's my personal hope that throughout my life that I settle into this evolutionary journey. Even in the last breath of life, show me how to return to source. Show me how to fully breathe, be breathed in my last breath, and return to source. So let's do a beautiful centering together, and then we'll go into our topic here, okay? Close the eyes. And as we close the eyes, the outer vision subsides. It acquiesces. And at the same time, an inner vision rises. And that inner vision, as it arises, it's a vast expanse. It's vast, so vast that there are no boundaries. So we settle into this vast expanse today, knowing that this is our commonality. This is what draws us together. This is what endures. This is what we evolve from and back into in this journey of life. We are lovers of truth. And in this vast expanse, the pain of separation dissolves. The struggle of wondering if I'm doing things just right or do I fit in, it dissolves. And we're left with what we most cherish, the essence that's nearest and dearest, that which we most cherish, that rises. And all our insecurities take haven here. And settle a little bit more deeply. This openness, this vast expanse, includes every emanation, every thought we've ever had, every experience and emotion we've ever had. This vast expanse includes everything. The space includes all the furniture. And in this vast expanse, we never lose the ability to think a particular thought. In fact, our thinking becomes more powerful. So we have every reason to magnetically come home. To truth and to love truth, to fall in love with truth, to fall in love with love. And with this space, this field, as the infinite foundation for our time together, go ahead and open the eyes and breathe. All right. So I think we're ready for our topic today. The intellectual discussion on top of the vast expanse. So the title of today's webinar, you may have noticed, was The Ego's Role in Healing. And it's a topic that I found in my own journey was causing great confusion. So I'll start a little bit with my journey. I have trauma in my background, as many of you know. And I recall going to my church when I was young. When I would say young, well, I recall, let's say, that the previous reverend at my church, and he was everything, the stereotype of what you consider a stuffy reverend, right? And he was very white-haired, and his talks, his Sunday talks, were generally very typical, dry, lengthy, and I just wasn't engaged, didn't find myself to be engaged at all. And then one day, that particular reverend left, and a new reverend came in. And this particular reverend waltzed into a town of 1,400 people in his van with his wife, who was from Colombia, and with 3 children of different multicultural backgrounds. And it threw the town for a loop. So there was a lot of gossip before, when this reverend arrived. He would get up on Sundays in a rainbow-colored robe, and he would speak with such passion and such love. And that rainbow-colored robe, it would just go out like a butterfly. I found myself wanting to go into the front row of the church as a young one to be next to him. There was something about him. He didn't care what the congregation thought of him. He was unapologetically fully himself in this awesome robe. And he got everybody in that congregation singing a Jewish song at the end. Shalom, my friend. Shalom, my friend. Back and forth from one side of the congregation to the other, from one side of the congregation to the other. Just amazing to take this congregation of very conservative white people, and through his presence and through his understanding of the universe, of God, of presence, of love, he took that entire flock, and by the time he left, everybody loved him. Now, he didn't stay long, but everybody loved him. And this was a shift from when he arrived. Everyone was very judgmental. And they were very conditioned to the previous version of God, right? So this person left a very early mark on my spiritual upbringing. And as I reflect back now, I realized he gave me permission to be myself. He was giving me permission to be myself by him being himself. And the transmission of consciousness that moved through him was palpable. You could feel it. It was like he was resonating, and I wanted to be next to him. I wanted to be up close next to him. So this initial experience was pivotal. And then as I started to unwind my own trauma, I found myself in different spiritual settings. Okay. And including in dedicated study in ashrams. So at one particular time in an ashram, I was there for a 40-day retreat. I stayed for 30 of the 40 days. And I remember seeing the congregation. There was so much diversity in the congregation. Some people were very detail-oriented. They wanted things done just right, and the flowers placed just so. And when you bowed to the teacher, you had to bow a certain way with your arms crossed. It was very precise. And I was watching all these different people that had come locally and from around the world. And I thought, well, this is interesting because I'm seeing a lot of different expressions here of spirituality. Everything from quite, I would say, more conservative expressions to more open expressions. Remember, at the same time, I'm trying to heal my trauma, right? So that, wow, this is fascinating. So I was watching some of the people come in who were very interested in detail. And that particular day, I was assigned to do puja, which is, go up and you do a prayer and you do certain movements. And a woman who was very interested in detail taught me how to do this very precisely. She was very interested in the precision, which I found to be lovely and irritating at the same time. I went up and I did the evening, circle 5 times in certain ways and lights and candles. And I finished that evening, and the meditation master there, who was a Kundalini meditation master, it's almost like he knew my thoughts. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, the reason I do these rituals is for them, is for the people who are very interested in rituals. There are some people that really love rituals, and that's why we do that this way in this temple. Took my arm and he said, you had so much love in the prayer. It was a beautiful way of embracing all these expressions of spirituality, all of the evolutionary expressions of spirituality, while at the same time, to me, saying, I could see your love shining through the ritual, through the precision of the ritual. So he was embracing all these evolutionary expressions of humanity. That affected me deeply, to be in the presence of someone who is not dogmatic, who could honor people where they are, embrace all the expressions of people coming to the temple, and at the same time say to me, I see your love. I see that you did this with love. So in trauma, what I have noticed in some spiritual circles, not only from being where I live, but being in many workshops and many extended retreats, is some people who've experienced trauma will have a split around spirituality. We come to spirituality often, many of us, broken. And we're so broken, some of us might waltz into the first teacher and say, oh my gosh, that's the answer. Because in our brokenness, we lost our discernment. We lost our sense of self. In the brokenness of the trauma, we haven't developed our sense of self. We didn't develop our ego. We don't even know who we are. And then we go to the promise of spirituality, the exotic call of spirituality. And oh, that teacher, that person, that mentor, that guide, they must know more than I do because I'm broken. And we go into these places, and some of us, for the first person we find, they know the answer. And then that person becomes the representative of God. And this can manifest in a number of ways. It can go into cults. It can go into people never developing their sense of self, the egoic sense of self that allows us to be discerning. That's a possibility too. So we just stay on that path the remainder of our life, and we do what that particular teacher says, or what that path calls for. It makes us very dutiful. And then for some of us, a split arises. In the evolution of our healing and our trauma, a split arises. Because we came to spirituality to ultimately heal, the great healing moment. And in this promise of the healing, that's supposed to be it, right? That's supposed to be it. But yet there's that part of us, that egoic part of us, the self-image part of us back here going, well, what about me? What do you like? What do you want to do in life? What are your talents? What are your abilities? Do you like the color purple? Do you like the color blue? We never had that sense of who am I, as in the individual self. What do I want to do? So this split can arise where the spiritual teachings are so magnetic and we think that must know, that must be it. But the individuality, the me-ness was not developed. So I'll see that. I've seen that in some spiritual communities, and it will manifest in different ways. It can manifest as the teacher knows. The teacher knows. So there's a acquiescing to the teacher. It's the glorification of the teacher, right? It's the emptying out further of the individual to the teacher. That teacher must know. And it can also further dissociation. For those of you who've experienced trauma and you've dissociated, you can be in spiritual communities or in a spiritual path, and it will further dissociation. It's easy to see how, right? Because in that pain of the split, then the dissociation comes up. And then, well, my coping mechanism is dissociation, so I'm going to dissociate more. The ego, I purport, has a very important role in the healing from trauma. Ego is designed to evolve. And if we understand collectively that the ego is designed to evolve, that has huge ramifications for us personally, for the healing community, and for humanity. If we were taught at a young age that this ego is like a persona we take on, and that we use it here, we develop it here, and we use it for our work, and we use that to bring this to our world, the ego needs to come up strongly, especially in the 20s, 30s, 40s. We have to have that sense of me-ness. What do I bring to the world? What am I doing in my world? What talents do I want to develop? The ego, through trauma, is often diminished, sometimes erased altogether. And if we do not have a healthy sense, a healthy environment for egoic development when we're young, that is going to cause problems for us later on. And many of us have seen that. So our job is not to dissociate further and fully put ourselves into spiritual path. Our job is to know where we are on this evolution of the ego. Where are we in that? Be inspired by the teachings, but not skip steps. And many spiritual paths focus on reducing ego, reducing attachment. How can you reduce something that hasn't been developed? So if our ego has not been developed and explored, it's going to be impossible to reduce. We have to bring the ego along. The Western model of therapy, I think, serves an important role in that it can help us untie knots and develop our ego. However, we don't want to get stuck in diagnoses. Because I guarantee you that many of the diagnoses out there in the Western model, for people who have experienced trauma, it's been a divorce between the mind and the heart. It's a divorce. So you think of bipolar messages, for instance, or BPD. When we're young and the mind and the heart get separated through trauma, divorced, it's going to go back and forth. The Western model serves a role. I think it can take us so far. It's okay to outgrow your therapist, by the way, your mentors, your guide. It's absolutely okay to outgrow them. I'm going to look at my notes here real quickly because there's a few things I wanted to cover. With this Western model, so many people talk about getting stuck during therapy. They reach a plateau and they feel like they get stuck. There's a stuckness there. In that stuckness, if our models of healing, or if the mentor or the guide has not explored more deeply the evolution of ego, you're going to be stuck with that particular therapist. That's why I was saying it's okay to outgrow your therapist. We always want to be with a mentor or a guide who has our level of consciousness or a little bit more. That's really important. In any career path, there are people who have various levels of understanding. The same is true in terms of personal growth, transformation, spirituality, therapy, healing. That's the same as true. You'd want to look for, mentors and guides that really inspire you. And in that inspiration, it should increasingly feel more simple. It should increasingly feel easier, less complicated. Our evolution is always towards simplicity. And our evolution in the simplicity always brings us to meet in the heart. That's why I say I'm not the common denominator between all of us as our hearts. Let's even look at the evolution of trauma. So initially, we don't know about our trauma. Many of us, we don't know. We just think that's how life was. And then something comes up and says, oh, this shame I have, where'd that come from? And then we evolve and say, oh, I want to understand. Maybe it's not me. Maybe I'm not my shame. So the trauma itself will start to evolve for those of us who have underlying compassion and empathy. I've noticed that unilaterally with everyone I work with, the compassion and empathy is intact. The trauma evolves. We understand. We have awareness of it. And in the understanding and awareness of the trauma, we start to disengage from it. It starts to lose its power. That's why it feels so good to listen to the inspiring podcast or read the book. There's an aha moment. In the purest form of understanding, the thought will stop. I understand now. I understand now. The Christ, forgive them, they know not what they do. He understood that those around him were confused in rigidity of belief and opinions and judgment. And that understanding was so great that it included forgiveness for those who would kill him. That's amazing. This leads to spiritual teachings and the power of spiritual teachings. And you may have noticed, again, in the evolution of religion to spirituality to oneness, some people are very interested in precise interpretation of doctrine. And they're very interested in morality, very precise interpretation of doctrine and morality, and it has to be just a certain way. Morality is an overlay for people who are deeply wedded to beliefs, some dense beliefs, some more sattvic or uplifting beliefs, but beliefs nonetheless. There are beliefs, there's a spectrum of beliefs from very dangerous and very manipulative to more sattvic, more uplifting. And morality is a code for many of those people. On some levels, it can be important because the person who's deeply wedded to beliefs, at the very least, if these beliefs are very dense, there's some sense of doctrine that they try to aspire to. Try to. But of course, it gets restrictive and then it gets racist and homophobic and, you know, my religion's better than your religion and all this crazy making. It's just crazy making. In the evolution of religion, the reason it evolves is because when we connect with the essence of the teachings, I'm talking the purity of the teachings, the purest teachings out there, there's a goodness that naturally arises. You don't need a moral code. You naturally want to care for each other. You naturally want to care for the earth. You're naturally inclusive. There's an evolution into spirituality. And in that evolution, the goodness naturally rises, the simplicity and the goodness. We have the ability to put ourselves in another person's shoes. We want to live more simply or celebrate the earth, keep the water clean. It's natural. Your inner teacher will let you know, oh, you didn't say that quite right. Your inner teacher tells you. You don't need an outer teacher saying, you shall not do this. Your inner teacher tells you. And that inner teacher, you start to love the inner teacher because the inner teacher is helping you evolve and come home and live in alignment with deeper parts of yourself. Some of us need morality until we don't. Until the inner teacher calls us so strongly that meaning guides our life. Okay. I know some people on this call grew up with rather intense experiences of religion. And I'm going to ask you to kind of share your experiences with that. This really affects childhood development because when you're growing up, you're looking to your parents as a guide, but then the parents are often using God as leverage. And who's bigger than God? Who knows more than God? So the child's growing up, doing its thing, sense of wonder. Parents are saying one thing, and they back whatever they want to say up with God. Oh my gosh. So here's the child. Hell hath no fury like God upon me. That's a very, very special category. And I have respect for each and every one of you, amazing respect for each and every one of you. For those of you on the call that have had the overlay of God as dominion, that's really intense. Getting out of that atmospheric burn can be, it's a lot. And I can also see how that overlay has taken on really deep significance in your lives. So the question becomes, in the healing of trauma, in this healing journey, what do I do personally? We don't want to be split between just the Western model and diagnoses, but yet we don't want to completely give ourselves away to a guru and say it's all about the guru. We don't want to end up in cults or whatever we do. We want to have a bridge between the two. We want to be inspired by the teachings because there's so much beauty in the teachings and the purity of the teachings. The purity of the teachings, there's so much beauty. Well, what about how we feel about things? So I wrote a few things down. How do we bridge that healing? How do we bring our humanity with us in the journey of healing? Bring it with us. Okay, not suffering in our humanity or saying our humanity's bad or we're sinners or shameful or no, not that, and not at the same time not spiritually bypassing. One of the things you've heard me mention that I'm putting forth here is to really connect with the purity of the teachings. So the teachings, the purest teachings have a transmission in them. You could read a sacred text and you could read it intellectually, or you can know it experientially. There's a transmission in the words. The kingdom of heaven lives within. Oh, I will study that. Let me study if the kingdom of heaven lives within. I will look everywhere except inside. Does it live within? I don't know, but I'll keep looking outside. And then something happens, and inside something happens. Wait a minute, the teaching of the kingdom of heaven lives within? What? Within? Within? That aha moment happens, something comes to life. So the sacred texts have transmissions in them. And there's mystics in every tradition. So in the Christian tradition, the Christian mystics, like Meister Eckhart, beautiful. In the Muslim tradition, Sufism, beautiful. Beautiful. In the Hindu tradition, Kashmir Shaivism. In every religion, there will be some people who have preceded us that have really connected with the living, breathing essence, the purity of the teachings. And they will support our evolution. And again, that evolution will move towards simplicity, embrace of simplicity. It will settle our heart. We'll feel more open, more connected. So connecting with the purity of the teachings, I think, is very important. And even when you read text, some of you may remember, sometimes I'll give homework assignment after online sessions, and I'll say, look up the definition of this. If it sounds dogmatic or moral, don't go to that definition. Look elsewhere. So sometimes when you read a text, you have to do it through your own filter. Now, okay, this sounds a little bit too dogmatic. Okay, not that one. But what are they trying to say? What are they trying to say underneath this? What's really being conveyed here in the purity of that definition or the teaching? So you start to get discerning, even with your minds, of what am I connecting here? What am I taking in? That's my next point, being discerning. When you go to church, when you go to a healer, when you go to a yoga class, be discerning. Be interviewing that teacher, that guide, that healer as you go in to meet with them or to sit with them. How does this resonate with you? Are you just emptying out? Empaths, by the way, and everyone on this call has a degree of empathy. Empaths are renowned for emptying out. We'll go in to meet someone, they know, or it's all about you, it's not about me. Cultivate your quality of discernment and be okay with it. Like, oh, that works for me. That doesn't. Because remember, again, along the way, healers, mentors, guides, therapists, doctors, they will have various levels of understanding. Be discerning. And that's immediately going to feed your individual ego self. Oh, this works with me. This doesn't work with me. I don't have to make that person wrong. I just don't want to go back. Doesn't resonate with me. Doesn't call me. So immediately that helps bring your individual ego in with your healing path. That discernment is so important because you're going back, you're checking in with my individual ego. How does that feel to me? Well, maybe I'll come back. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll stay 15 minutes. Maybe I'll go on. Maybe I want to work with this person a long time. So you're not giving yourself away. You're not assuming that they know. The more we evolve in this journey, the more there's a saying, I know that I know not. Because the intellect is getting, over a period of time, once the ego is established and we've explored the mind, then at that point, there will be this beautiful, willing evolution of the mind where it doesn't want to grasp so much anymore. Doesn't want to grasp. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The next one I talked about earlier, don't be afraid to outgrow your therapist. That's also good for our individual sense of self. Don't be afraid to outgrow your healer. You don't have to make them wrong. You just go on. You're on an evolutionary journey. Everybody is. The next one I mentioned, this one really works with the ego in terms of trauma healing. Those of us who are drawn to healing, trauma, and transformation, the ego will say, I want this to be done now. Like, I'm over this. I have endured this for so long. I am done and I am over it. So the ego will get all sassy and say, I know, like, done with this. It's a lifelong evolution. And the markers of progress, they're not what we typically think of as markers. Oh, I got my 5 stars and I got my certificate. The markers of progress in terms of healing and our evolution is resiliency. The trigger went from 6 weeks, taking us down to 6 days. But the ego will still say, no, it should have only been 6 minutes then. 6 weeks to 6 days. Yay, resiliency. The time frame collapses. That's great. Also, your inner teacher will inform you. That's another marker. You leave a conversation, it didn't go quite right, and you hear the inner teacher in back going, knock, knock. It's not offensive. The inner teacher's like, hey, I got something to share. Didn't say that quite right. And you're like, oh, thank you. Next time I'll do it better. And there's a refined message that comes about with the inner teacher. There's a refinement. Great. Another marker happened with somebody on the call recently where she texted and had just a beautiful insight, a beautiful sharing about her own healing. The insight came up. You can't say, oh, the insight's going to come up at 10 a.m. on a Sunday, but it came up for her spontaneously. I'm sure you've all had them. where an insight arises spontaneously and you see things in a different way, something's shifted, that's a marker of healing, of evolution. When I say evolution, I'm not using it in terms of better. Please know that. That's a whole other topic. So these are the markers that we want to be aware of and celebrate. And the ego will constantly say, it's not enough. It's just not enough. No, 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 no. We're going to settle in. And when those moments arise, you stop and pause and say, yes. Just an inner yes of well done. Or a conversation that went well with family that it could have been a disaster in the past. You pause and stop. Yes. Well done. And again, this embraces our entire faculty of humanness. It embraces every aspect of ourself. You know how I said earlier in our centering that the space includes all our thoughts, it includes all our emotions, it includes all of us, everything. The bigger our lens gets, so to speak, or the more that we settle and settle and settle and settle into that bigger field, it includes everything that precedes us. That's why I say we will never lose the ability to think a thought or feel an emotion or have a perception. It will include that. And in fact, I said, the mind becomes more powerful. Why? Because you're filtering less. You're filtering less through the glasses of your hurts, your trauma, and you're speaking more from your authentic self, from the wider and wider and wider rings. So there's a syncing up. You know how many of us go into work with one persona, come home with one persona. Oh, got to rest, get on my, joggers. Yay. Oh, there's just a syncing up with this. It's so important that we bring the ego along. It is so important that we embrace our humanity. It's so important to have faculty of voice, especially in a confused world. We have hit the jackpot on this path. And our trauma has just, wow, it woke us up, brought us here. We all have an undertone of compassion and empathy. We have hit the jackpot. I know it's hard. I know that sometimes the fire, the Agni, wants to just incinerate us. But to be able to speak in a world that's deeply wedded to beliefs and its own trauma, for us to have this clarity is huge. It's huge. There's a story of a woman named Kunti, Kunti. She would pray to God to bring her suffering so that she could remember God. She recognized that her personal suffering gave her the presence to be with God, to be with consciousness, to be with the simplicity. What else is there to do, really? I'm sure each of you have noticed when the lenses gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it includes the previous lenses. When you've addressed your own shame and really worked with it, you can see it in others and it doesn't trigger you. I see the shame and I see the hurt in that person. When that person, if you've addressed your know-it-allness with your mind, that's a big one. If you've addressed that and you're in the wider and wider and wider rings, then you see it in another person. And then you can say, oh, that person's trying to be a know-it-all like I was because they want to feel good about themselves. They want to feel important or helpful or whatever it is. It doesn't trigger you anymore. I think that's super exciting. And again, that's another marker on the path. Another marker of, yay, I didn't get triggered by my own shame. And I saw it in another person and that used to really bother me. And Sri Ramana Maharshi said that this is the best thing we can do for humanity, what we are doing today. That this is the best thing we can do for humanity. Why? Because we become clearer and clearer and clearer. We're not feeding emotional warfare. We're not going into a boxing ring with beliefs. I'm going to get your belief. I'm going to beat your belief up. No, I'm going to beat your belief up. No. And again, to do this, we do not dissociate. We do not spiritually bypass. We bring our humanity with us. 100%. your you-ness, what makes you you? What passions do you have? What do you love to do? Finding voice, finding agency of voice. The final thing I want to mention, and this is a vision I would hope for healers for therapy. One day, maybe not during my lifetime, but maybe, who knows, that healers and therapists would deeply understand that the ego evolves and that they are supporting, joining together in clinics or in personal practices through their modalities to help each of us with the evolution of the ego. So if someone comes in with a very fragile sense of self, that therapist or that healer works to support, to establish the ego, to bring it out, to evoke the establishment of the ego, to help that person find agency of voice. And it doesn't have to be through words. It can be through massage, cranial sacral, acupuncture, different ways. But people would understand this. And we wouldn't get stuck in these diagnoses. And then the person lives with that. What do? Well, I'm going to have this diagnosis the rest of my life. So I love to see healers totally dive into this model of the ego is designed. It's an evolutionary journey here. And it can be a beautiful expression of the ego. Beautiful expressions, a creative expression of ego. And everything can be creative, right? It doesn't not being on stage. You can be creative in how you clean your house. Everything's a creative act. So if we understood this collectively, if we understood this in our families and individually, and if our healers understood this, it could help nurture us, our communities, our families, humanity, through the journey of ego. And think, when you're a baby, you don't have a sense of division. You arrive here, you have a sense of oneness. And then it becomes, oh my, hand. So we arrive here with oneness. And then over time, we say, oh, not mom's hand, my hand. And then we go on this journey of evolution. And guess what? When we leave, we go back to that oneness of the baby. It's so apparent that things are designed for evolution here. So apparent. Let's embrace it. If healers, therapists understood this, man, right now, therapists will be specialists. Okay, I deal in domestic abuse, various specialties, right? Great, that's fine. That's fine. But what if you were in a collective where some therapist helped establish ego? Get it going, get it jump-started. Let's work through your trauma. Let's get it in there. Let's get your voice established. If some therapist reinforced ego, in other words, okay, now that we got it established, let's give your legs, let's get some strength underneath that. What do you want to bring to the world? What do you want to do? How do you want to use your voice? What do you want to do with that ego? And then what if we had other therapists who said, wow, I can see you've explored the mind a lot. And I can see that the weight of the mind, the weight of the intellect, that weightiness is now looking to transform, to evolve. Let's explore that. Let's explore that. I think that's a really exciting model. And I think it would alleviate a lot of suffering, a lot of confusion, and a lot of suffering. And I know some of us on the call too are in the healing arts. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service. I'm going to look over here in our chat. Question, is the goal to reduce the ego after developing it?
Sorry, I can maybe explain. So this is the first time in my life that I've heard about developing the ego
Mhm.
instead of killing it because I've
There you
been,
go.
yeah, so it's a very interesting perspective because all my life or everywhere I look, even in the spiritual, kind of, forums or something, everyone is
Mhm.
talking about how the ego is like could be almost the devil, it's the bad thing and it's something you're supposed to kill. Even if you talk about psychedelics, let's say, people talk about the ego death and etc. And so my question is, so when you talked about developing it, are you talk is there like I don't know how to explain it. Is there like two types of egos, one that can self-destruct and one that can um, you know, make you do good or
In terms of the ego, in our development, in our egoic development, have any of you had the experience in your healing of finding that there's been a default mode that you thought you were all your life? For instance, I just felt I was shameful all my life. I didn't know I wasn't shameful all my life. I call these default modes that get planted very, very early when we're very young. And the reason it's a default mode, we're not conscious of them, right? Is because it was so young, pre-verbal, baby child state, amorphous kind of, we're coming from the oneness, coming online. And that's egoic development getting interrupted. We just inserted a default mode of shame or low self-worth or something so painful that I have to scatter. And in a healthier environment for egoic development, the child would be able to rest, express his or her feelings, would feel more comfortable, creative. And that would be a healthier sense of egoic development going into the world. With these default modes that will get laid down, that can create a split. It will be very painful because it was laid down at such an early age, and we take it on as a case of mistaken identity, and we just live through our shame. I am my shame. I am my shame. I am my shame. I am my shame. By some mechanism that we cannot describe how or why it happens to some of us, but by some mechanism, that split, that default mode will come up for us, and something happens that says, oh, wait a minute, I'm not my shame. So I described that earlier. I'm not going to get into that too much. So did that answer that part of your question?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I was just thinking about like a lot of people's goal is to kill the ego.
That is so prevalent in spiritual teachings. Kill the ego, kill the ego. Or you do hear of ego death, or people that, go to ayahuasca or some like
Mm,
major retreats, right?
yeah.
Where they grapple with all these different things that are going on. Egoic death, it doesn't have to be dramatic, you guys. Doesn't have to be dramatic. But somehow some of us will make it super dramatic. It doesn't have to be dramatic. The path that we're on is an integrated path. It's digestible. It doesn't have some of the peak sustainable moments, say that drugs would. We can't keep those moments, we can't integrate and keep them steady. This is a very digestible path. It's very grounded, rooted, and easy for the body to assimilate, easy for the brain, mind, body to assimilate. So it's this settling in, settling in, settling in. For some of us, those dramatic moments will point us this direction, but it need not be overly dramatic. With the spiritual teachings, we can verify the truth of who and what we are in our own direct experience right now. In that direct verification, that will also, by the way, incorporate the individual ego. It would brings it along with it. Just, how I was saying discernment earlier when you look out for healers, modalities. If you go right now to your nearest and dearest direct experience of who you know yourself to be, The ego will go, oh, I feel seen and honored and heard, and I don't have to work so hard. And you've included me. You've included me. You haven't pushed me away. You haven't reduced me to nothing. You've included me. Oh, yay, says the ego. This is where, with some of the teachings, this gets confusing. What am I supposed to reduce? Like, what does that look like? Well, like I said earlier, you cannot reduce something you haven't developed. Coming to your direct verifiable experience of who you know yourself to be without a shadow of a doubt, that's the most powerful experience we can have. And it will, by its nature, include the individual ego. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your upbringing with religion?
Yeah, yeah. And I was going to say too, I had just had this memory that came to my mind while we're talking about the concept of ego. And this has also been like a journey for me, recognizing that it's not something that you have to just completely erase, that erasing ourselves and our identity is not the goal. I remember being, I don't know, 13 or so and hearing the pastor in our church at the time saying that the source of all evil, it's not the devil, it's self. And, you know, any word that starts with self, self-esteem, self this, self that, self-care, even probably he would have, if that word was in the vocabulary yet. He was thinking of those things as all being like the source of evil. And so anything coming from us, we couldn't trust ourselves at all. It was all completely evil. So
Mm.
that was really foundational, I think, in the doctrines and teachings from when I was growing up. And I think what makes differentiating from a family or a community, like spiritual differentiation, so traumatic and so scary is, and like so uniquely, I guess, almost like shameful feeling, is because um, the, yeah, like you'd said, it's not just disagreeing about how to raise your kids or where to go to school or some other issue that parents or children or family can have major disagreements on, or politics or whatever can be very intense.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, to them, it triggers such a life and death reaction because, or like it triggers like feelings to them that are literally life and death because
Mm.
in their minds, um, you're going onto the path that in their minds could be eternal conscious torment or something. So there's a huge amount of, at least for me, when I started to come out of that, and when my family started to recognize that I was on a different wavelength, um, the reaction was so extremely intense that it was really hard for me not to absorb that level of guilt for, first of all, feeling so bad for what they were going through.
Mm.
Um, and then also to not absorb the shame for like how they then viewed me. And then I also knew that they were probably very embarrassed and hoping that other people wouldn't find out maybe what I was now or what I thought or what direction I was going. So it's really hard when those people that have been so core to your identity view you in that way, and then they're telling you that God views you in that way. So to like not feel really bad for them and take on guilt for how much you're causing them so much pain, because to them it's such a life and death thing, and then also to
Mm.
not feel that shame as well was really hard. And like a, it's a, like you said, a lifelong journey. So I feel like I've made a lot of growth now, or I've gotten a lot stronger. Like the illustration, you know, of the going from the thin wavering reed that's just really easily shaken, and you know, I remember like racing heart, like just barely able to get my breath in those early days, and then now being able to go into those situations still a bit, you know, not, it still affects me a bit, but I'm much more confident in who I am. I don't take on as much of what I know that they might think. um
Mm.
so yeah, and I think the other thing that I processed a lot was the cognitive dissonance between having grown up in a family that was at the same time very loving and kind and
Mm.
caring and generous and just wonderful, processing the fact that I've had all these great memories and experiences, and some of them, you know, continuing on, but also the fact that there were some really hurtful and damaging and traumatic and really, you know, bad things that had happened, I guess. And being able to
Mhm.
understand how those two can fit together. and
Mm-hmm.
like going forward and how I can think about or approach that community and the family. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of my thoughts that I've had. I mean, I have moments. I don't know if I've evolved that. Sometimes I feel like I've evolved, and there's other moments where I'm like, still feeling very shaky. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's hard.
It's a big overlay again, when
Uh,
you put God on top of things, and you've done so well. It's so beautiful just to see your growth. And I love, you talked about the just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. That's so
that's
beautiful.
come to my mind many times.
And in a way that, as you're saying, it's authentic empathy. Sometimes the mind will say, well, you should be forgiving, or you should do this, or you should know better than that. And a beautiful thing about healing is those rings get bigger and bigger as the lens gets bigger and bigger. The extension of forgiveness. This is another thing about spiritual teachings, right? They focus on forgiveness, forgiveness. You have to forgive, you have to forgive. And then there's a confused message because you're like, and wait a minute, awful things have been done. Where's the accountability? In those ever widening rings, the forgiveness can extend itself to the degree that it frees you. It doesn't mean that you condone their actions. It doesn't mean that you save them. It doesn't mean that you're healing them. But to the degree that it frees your essence, that's the extension of the forgiveness. Because the truth is, here, as we see our world in this day, we need to hold people accountable for actions. That's why we have police forces. There has to be accountability. And until enough of us have evolved to know that the goodness inside is self-referring, that we do not want to steal from our neighbor, that we do not want wars, that we value more peace over division, until we know that, collectively enough of us, we will have to have police forces. Think of the forgiveness as that expands, as you settle back. Think of it as a freeing of the aroma of your heart. Not that you're saying, oh, you get the pass, mom, dad. Think of it as the freeing of the aroma of your own heart. And then that is like, oh, I do want to free my heart. I'm not condoning what they did. Yes, please share a little bit about your religious trauma.
I just wanted to say that all of you who shared your religious trauma, I can relate, and I just want to send a lot of support because I've been through it as well. I was taught my first memories are that I am judged and hated by God
Mm,
because I am
mm,
bad.
mm,
And I have to do exactly as mm, these people say because
mm-hmm.
otherwise I will be eternally punished. And that for like a 4 or 5 year old, it's so traumatic. I
Yeah.
even received like some sort of like children's books that had like illustrations of like hellfire and stuff like that. And it scared me so much, and it just like made me so shameful my whole life. And like I would pray because I was out of fear, and that's not what I want. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think the last time I had my sessions with you, I was telling
Mm-hmm.
you that as an adult now, I still want to keep my faith, but I need for myself, I need to change my relationship to God, from
Mm-hmm.
fear to love. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started still on a subconscious, deep level. There's still a lot of fear, and that's going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of time to overcome. But I'm starting on the conscious level to change the way I speak. So, for instance, before I go to bed, when I say my prayers, I also say, I'm loved and protected by God. I'm loved and protected. I'm like trying to um consciously tell myself, and hopefully it'll stick to my subconscious too, that I am loved and I am protected, instead of feeling just like I will be attacked by the devil, or I am, like it's just, or God's gonna punish me, or he hates me or something. So it's just like I'm trying so hard to change that now as an adult, but it takes a lot of time and energy. So yeah. But my heart
Yeah.
goes out to everyone who's ever been religiously traumatized because I understand.
There is a place for things like affirmations and gratitude. Sometimes on the healing journey, we're like, oh, affirmations and gratitude. And we almost like take them like, oh, it's just whatever. It's not for me. But there is power to it. And I don't know how many of you do a gratitude journal or write down, but there is a power to it. It sounds kind of hokey, but there's a power to the gratitude. Why? Because energies like gratitude, compassion, which you all have, and empathy, which you all have, those are the meta energies. Those are the great energies. Those are greater energies, bigger energies that include other energies below. So you know how fear, which would be a denser energy, it cannot understand love, but love can understand fear. So the denser energies, when we are in the denser energies, it's really hard. When we're in a state of fear, we cannot understand love. So if you have God as an overlay and God says, you got to be a certain way, act a certain way. When you're in that state of fear, how can you know love? And love is the essence of all religions. So tell me how in the world, if you have a fearful religious path and the wrath of God, the fear of God has been installed in you, how in the world is that path going to get you to love? Love knows fear, but fear does not know love. Fear will keep you reduced and tiny and going to church endlessly and the certain putting money into the collection plate and one day God will love you. And it's not going to happen. Meta energies know the micro energies. That's why, again, it's so important. Healing, compassion, empathy, which you all have. And that's where gratitude brings these qualities out. Just a little gratitude journal. It sounds hokey, but it works.
Okay, I just wanted to share. It wasn't God for me. It was society, clan, and neighborhood, and whole community. I grew up in Japan, so if you shame the whole society, family, clan, you're a bad person. You have to be ashamed. You're a really bad human. So I was just so surprised. It doesn't have to have a face of God, and it's just so international thing. I see the commonality, common thread.
Yes.
In my culture, it doesn't have to take the face of God. And yeah, thank you for sharing all that. It's just so eye-opening. Like I thought I don't have any religious trauma, but yes, I do in a different form.
Yes.
And one more thing I just wanted to add was forgiveness was just so difficult for me because of accountability idea. What does real forgiveness mean? If I don't like the person deep inside in my heart, does that really mean forgiveness? Do I have to be forgiving enough to invite them for dinner? No, I won't get there in my lifetime, that kind of thing. So I was having all these cyclone of ideas around forgiveness, but I forgave myself for not being able to forgive my parents first. And I really have to forgive myself on that point. Then I decided to be open about the idea someday, maybe not in my lifetime. I will be able to forgive them if I evolve spiritually someday. Then something opened up. My mind shifted. And I met this quote by Brené Brown. Everyone is doing their best with the tools and understanding available to them. Then I've been always doing my best, even though looking back, I did so many bad things. I'm not best proud about myself, but I was doing best back then. So did my parents. Then I am finally on the real path of forgiveness. I'm on.
Beautiful sharing. Again, that goes to those ever widening rings, ever deepened understanding. Remember, understanding, the purest form of understanding, brings us to quietness. That's why understanding is so delicious. In that quietness or in that silence, what we were trying to understand is fully seen. It's resolved. It's come to resolve.
Thank you.
I mentioned a little bit earlier about how you are on stage. Life has been, you've experienced your own trauma. You come from a Hindu background. I'm very curious as how your ego has played out, has developed and evolved during your time on stage and now as a creative director.
Thank you. Yes. So many things buzzing through my mind right now. I love what you said about the meta energies. I'm reminded of a story, a dance piece that I choreographed, and it was on the Hindu god Krishna. And there was a snake called Kalinga that was poisoning the waters of Yamuna. And all the villagers got together and said, look, all the cows are dying. They're all cowherds. What can we do to Meanwhile, Krishna had gone into the waters and was playing with Kalinga. And when I choreographed, and Krishna was a babe, was a little boy, but when I danced it, I thought I'm going to do Krishna as an adult. So every time, and Kalinga represents the ego. And every time Krishna says, look, I've killed you. Look at me, I've killed you. Kalinga's like, have you? Because and so there is this playfulness that Kalinga makes Krishna and Krishna makes Kalinga. They're all part of the same picture. And that was a lot of fun to play around with. This followed me around this story. I remember going, I was in Glasgow, I was meant to perform this, and I was in a very bad place, just in a really bad place. And I went there to perform this. It was in a temple in Glasgow, and this performance was meant to happen. And for some reason, the player would not work. It just would not work. And while this was going, the priest there was looking, and I was getting really annoyed and angry. Like, I'm going to make this work. I want to dance about ego and peace, It was just, well, show you how wonderful I am, and the priest was very quietly looking at me, and he said, I think the Lord wants to, because on Krishna's birthday, this was on Krishna's birthday, Janmashtami, and the enactment is that he's born, and the parents run around, trying to save him from the demon. And he said to me, I think the Lord wants to be born. He wants to see you dance. And I went, oh, that sounds really wonderful. Okay, I'll wait. Anyway, so this happened, and they had two people there who were autistic, who were playing the parents. And there was something about them that really touched my heart. And when that finished, I danced. My CD player suddenly miraculously worked. It was the most bizarre thing. And I fell to, and I was in full surrender. And the veil that he had given the mother, he put that veil on me, and I was just covered in this love. And I looked at this model of Krishna, and he had little cuts on his feet, and I had cuts on my feet. And I said, and I was doing the same dance, and I said, what are those cuts? And he said, oh, that's where the snake bit him, his ego bit him. Right. So it was a real kind of whoa meta kind of moment. And it, I'll wrap it up by saying that I look on my ego not as a snake, but as a German shepherd. If my German shepherd is barking with its fangs out, saying, look, there's a thief, will I shame this beautiful dog? Or will I thank it? Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Email sent to head office. Thank you. And then it stops barking. Right? So I don't demonize my ego anymore. I'm playful with it. Just like Krishna was, I'm playful with this wonderful thing. Also knowing that this great fear is coming from a place of deep love to protect me. And I want you and you and you to acknowledge it, but God forbid if I have to ever acknowledge my own ego. in the process, because it's so much easier when someone, it's not, by the way, it's not easier at all. It's much easier when I acknowledge it. You know, when I pause and say, yes, I hear you, baby. I got you. I hear you. You know, and that's that coming home. I'm in recovery, and one of the things we say in recovery is service keeps you clean. And I would not really understand that before. We were in the rooms once, and this chap with 44 years of recovery came in, and there was, Zoom sometimes has some issues. So I got logged out and I came back in, and this guy with 44 years of recovery, sobriety, said, "Who the hell is in charge around here?" And I said, "Oh, don't you know higher power?" And I sort of cracked on, right? And lots of those other fellows messaging me saying, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I wasn't triggered, but they were triggered. I thought, why is that? Why was I not triggered and they were triggered? It's because when I was a kid growing up in Calcutta, I never said to myself, one day I'm going to grow up and be the manager of the Crystal Meth Anonymous meeting. like that was on my cards. You know what I mean? So I wasn't triggered. I wasn't validated by that. I was just doing there and being there for service because that's what I needed to do. But why is it that in other spaces I'm triggered? Is because my ego deeply cares about me in that space. And therefore, the concept that this is an ever evolving thing is so radical because it integrates everything into my experience. And thank you for letting me share.
That's a beautiful sharing, and you bring up an important point. If you look at the evolution of the ego, it will care about something. It will care about your talents, your passions, dancing, creativity, healing. It will care. There's a quality of care in that. So the ego is a creative process. I think it becomes a problem when we view it as an entity. If we view it as, like you're saying, if you view it as something, to like tussle with and fight with and all these things, if it's an entity, I think it becomes a problem. But if it's a creative process, an evolutionary process, then you can see in your own life, think in past, each of you in your own life, when you were so drawn to something that it took you over, you couldn't help yourself. Like something was calling you to that passion, to those studies, or, to that hobby, or something was just possessing you to express. That's a beautiful expression of ego. The passions you have, the creativity you have, sewing, healing, languages. There's something is calling us to develop, to evolve, to grow, to learn, to transform. Beautiful sharing. And of course, I love those kind of stories about Krishna, and I could go on and on with you about those forever, but the storytelling is so powerful. Okay, anybody else want to share here? Questions, thoughts? We're good? We covered a lot of ground today, a lot of material. Why don't we do a nice return to centering again? We've had all these beautiful expressions that have arisen and subsided back into the silence. We arose from the silence, and we're going to return to the silence. All our emanations, all our thoughts, all our joys, questions, they're rising into the silence and the return to the silence. So let's go ahead and close the eyes. And isn't it exciting to talk about these topics? Does part of you feel a little bit more alive inside? Maybe there's a little sparkly quality. Happiness being evoked. When deeper parts of ourself are evoked through conversations like this, and when we feel safe together, what is evoked in that sparkly quality is happiness, and that lives within each of us. What a joy it is to come together in understanding as lovers of truth, and what a joy it is to have happiness evoked from the inside out. My heart's smiling to be together, to all of us together. And in that happiness is there also a settled quality. And a nourishment of our time together that reinforces our commitment to the path of love. There's a nourishment that just yums it up. It reinforces and nourishes our commitment to our own evolution and to the path of love. So receive now. Receive all this nourishment. You're completely permeable and you're receiving this nourishment. The nourishment of the silence, the purest, purest being. So pure. So pure and innocent, the original innocence. The original innocence. This original innocence, this purity, includes every thought you've ever had, every emotion. Life is a journey rising from the original innocence. And in the evolution, a return to this original innocence, this purity. May the purity of the sacred texts continue to inspire us, to continue to call us home. May this day nourish us, our time together nourish us so deeply that we know that we can come to this wellspring and drink from this wellspring. And as lovers of truth, may the truth shine so brightly that all temporary truths, collapse within its presence. Okay. Let's go ahead and open the eyes, but stay connected. Stay connected. I'm just so happy to be with all of you today. I'm just so happy. You're just so beautiful. And I'm so glad each of you are in our dear world. Sometimes some of us talk more frequently than others, but just know if we're not connected physically, we're always, always forever connected wherever we are in the world with whatever we're doing. It's just as it is. And I cannot tell you how often I think of each of you